This is Coder Radio, Episode 2, for June 18th, 2012. Hi everyone, you're listening to Coder Radio, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly talk show taking a pragmatic look at the art and business of software development and related technologies. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, Michael Dominic. Hey there, Michael.
Hey Chris, how you doing?
Hey man, welcome to Episode 2. Congratulations. This is really the hardest one. The first one, that's everybody can do one podcast, but doing multiple podcasts, that takes real skill, sir, so congratulations.
Yeah, I feel the pressure. I feel the weight.
Yeah. Well, we've got a fun episode because this being a development show, one of the big things that happened in the world of developers this last week was the Apple Worldwide Developer Conference, although we're going to take our own kind of look at it, and I think some people in our audience will find it of a particular interest, the way we're going to cover it. And then we've also got some feedback we're going to get to. And now, Michael, maybe towards the end of the show, we could plug some of the upcoming episodes that you've sort of charted out, because I think people have an interest in that, but we'll save it. That's just a teaser for what's coming up. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, why don't we do our first feedback I see you have here. I'll let you take it.
Sure. So first off, thank you all for your emails. There were quite a lot of them, and many of them were rather lengthy. Yeah. So for the sake of time, I've boiled them down into the three most common either requests or topics. The first one is from someone named Brett, and a few others echoed the same thing. For a beginner looking to get employment, what would be the best programming language / platform to study? Now, I totally understand why this is a question that might concern you greatly, but actually, the internet didn't get any smaller. There is tons of code that needs to be written. So pick one that you like, that's reasonable. So don't pick VBasic 6.
Right.
And, or Fortran. And just study it, get some code samples, and start looking for a job. I know that's not what you want to hear,
right?
But honestly, you don't need to say, oh my God, mobile's hot, I have to go learn Android.
Okay.
Whatever you like, as long as it's Ruby. There you go.
Yeah, I don't believe you. I don't believe you when you say that. What about how do you know? How would you say you could get a good feel if something's dying off? Okay, so maybe there's some languages that are sort of at the end of their usefulness, but people are still kind of current in them. Like they're still semi-popular, but you could tell 5 years down the road they're kind of going to be diminished.
So dying off is actually probably not a good way to put it. It's not like an old version of Ubuntu that no one's going to run.
Right.
Fortran, as someone in the chat is pointing out, and the older languages do still get used.
Right, true.
But they're used in settings that a junior level programmer wouldn't be in. Academics, very high level banking type things. If you're a junior person, I would go with something higher level and more modern.
Okay. All right, that makes sense.
And it depends on your area. So I know in the New York area, Ruby is huge. Mobile's huge. Java's huge. Actually, you know what? Just learn anything you like and go for it.
As long as it's not VB6.
As long as it's not VB6, and that's just because you'll cry. And I don't want you to be sad.
Remember, we just covered the last episode, though. They're gonna support that thing for ever.
With their dying breath, I'm sure.
Yeah. All right, well, that's a good one. So thank you to Brett and the others who sent that in, because we did get a bunch of emails. It was awesome.
Yep. So the second thing is something me and Chris had discussed several times, but I felt it would be too boring for you guys. The idea that in each show there should be a code sample.
Oh, okay.
For instance, the person whose name I believe is Tom wrote in as a possible suggestion to do a sample of hooking into Twitter from a mobile device or from a web app. I can definitely do that, but I don't know how many of you actually want to see that. So if you could, email in whether you're for or against it. My concern would be that it would be just too boring on an audio cast.
What about something that's supplemental, like you could talk about the high points of it and then more information could be in the show notes? But see, it's also something I don't want you to have to spend a ton of time on. Because here's what'll happen is you'll get 15, 20 emails from people saying, yeah, I want to see that, but you won't get an email from the 5,000 people who
Detractors.
don't. Yeah.
That's true.
So that's a tough one. But, I think there's got to be a happy medium there.
I think the happy medium is if it's something larger, I could do a portion of it each week.
Interesting. Well,
but again, send in your thoughts and we'll let democracy decide.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've had some other ideas, sort of you and I have shot through over email that maybe some of the stuff we talked about might kind of play into that. So we'll
do you want to go into that at all or no?
Sure. If you want to, yeah. I guess it would fit in the feedback segment, wouldn't it?
It's from the same guy. It's from Tom.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's the same email. Tom also suggested that we do an open source Jupiter Broadcasting app and host it on something like GitHub.
Yeah.
We can definitely do that as a community thing. There are some rules. First off, to get it into the App Store, it has to be a non-copyleft license. So right off the bat, it has to be Apache or BSD.
Okay.
And also, there would need to be enough interest to support it.
So we'd have to actually have some people. It would be something like I would work on to kind of, learn a few things, whatever I could do, and then we'd probably need to have a few people in the audience sort of join in and work on it with us, and then we could sort of integrate the process from the very beginning, like we're doing right now, all the way to execution to submitting to the App Store, all on the show.
Absolutely, yeah, and we could even do it as an HTML5 PhoneGap app, so it can go run on more than one platform.
Yeah, I think we'd want to do that, right? Because we definitely want to target Android and iOS and anything else that we could.
Yeah, and I'm very open to that. I can help out with putting it on GitHub and kind of being a benevolent dictator. It's just up to the community. If you guys are interested, drop us a line.
Yeah, email us coderradio@jupiterbroadcasting.com or use the contact us form up. Just go to Jupiter Broadcasting and click the little contact button at the top. I think that could be really awesome because what it could be is we could figure out like some way, maybe like the last 10 minutes of every show would be spent talking about a little bit about the app, and then we would sort of develop it out in the open with the community on the show, and then obviously behind the scenes between shows, and just start from genesis to production.
Absolutely, and with GitHub and tools of that nature, you could really do it in an open way, and nobody, no expenditure. Everybody has the tools if they have a web browser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be really cool, especially with that. What was your tool last week? That online IDE, I forget what it was called, but stuff like that too.
Yeah, coding. Yep.
Yeah. And stuff like that, it makes it even more approachable. I think that could be really cool, and the end result would be an app for the network, which would be really awesome too.
That would be great, and everybody gets it. Chris, I was very surprised to see how many high school students emailed me directly.
Yeah, that's interesting.
If you're looking to get a job like our first emailer, participating in open source is the best thing you can do.
Because it's a way to get some experience, even if you don't have an employer on your resume or something like that, right?
It's free experience and free teaching.
Yeah.
So I definitely encourage them to help us build a PhoneGap app. It's fun.
I like that. Doing it in PhoneGap would mean HTML5, which would mean that we would just write it once, essentially, right?
Well, that's not entirely true. We'd have to write a native wrapper for iOS and for Android.
Interesting. That might be kind of cool.
But the logic would be more or less written once.
Right. Yeah. Huh. And it's all pretty easy to do because we've got RSS feeds for everything, and in there are descriptions, titles, artwork are in the RSS feeds. Everything's in there that you would need to supply the app with fresh content. So it really would just be, you write the framework around it, and then the content is always updated, from the network directly. So the app stays fresh just by being subscribed to all the feeds that are already available.
Yeah, and it is really a good learning experience for students. They have to interact with some sort of server, some sort of API in theory, depending on the functionality you want. But it really is a great idea. Let's say we add Twitter integration. This is a great idea.
Yeah, that'd be neat. Like I'm listening to, of course, that's so spammy too. I hate it when people tweet that kind of stuff. But I'd love it if it's links to my stuff. Shoot, that's okay by me.
Yeah.
Well, all right, great. Well, let us know, folks, what you want, and we'll keep reading the feedback and go from there.
Right. And the last point, Chris, the people have spoken.
Okay.
They demand HTML5.
Wow. For what?
Everything. Everybody who emailed me mentioned HTML5.
Wow, really?
With one exception who mentioned C++. And they were outside my house with pitchforks. so we're gonna have to do it.
Okay. So, what, were they worried we were going to use something else? I mean, what?
I may have put on Twitter that I was going to do everything in VB6.
Oh, silly. Yeah. Well, you kind of riled them up, is what you're saying. So that's why they had pitchforks.
Yes, no, I didn't really do that, but there's just a tremendous amount of interest in it, and also it really does tie into the idea of doing the open source project. It's
HTML5 is really, I mean, I think maybe I come to it with a little bit of bias, thinking it's too simple, but it's really kind of incredible what I've seen people pull off.
And Chris, there's just something in the chat I'd like to address quickly.
Sure.
Marcus Dettori, I hope I said that right, is asking why GitHub and why not Launchpad?
Yeah.
And the answer is that GitHub has GUI clients that people know how to use for Windows, Mac, and Linux. And I feel that more people are likely to have GitHub accounts than Launchpad, and also I have a GitHub account.
Yeah, Launchpad is good though. I mean, I don't have any
it's
cons
great
with it, but yeah. I think probably for a general more mass appeal, people will just kind of be discovering the show that already kind of have an interest in this topic. I mean, you're kind of guaranteed they're likely going to have a GitHub account already.
And GitHub is very newbie friendly. They have lots of easy to follow tutorials on getting started. I don't know if Launchpad addresses that audience as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for sending your feedback in. Now, should we move on to the beginning? Should we peek into WWDC this week and see what kind of slipped out that we thought was interesting? Now, you have to walk a tight line here, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Because you kind of know more than the general public. So I will make sure that we only cover stuff that was publicly disclosed. I'm your barometer. So there you go. All right, so we'll watch that line because this is so silly the way Apple does this stuff.
Yeah, it's complicated, but yeah.
All right, so why don't we start with your first note from the iOS 6 and Mountain Lion stuff is Facebook's here, baby. Facebook integration is here, and I happen to think this is a great thing. What do you think?
I think it's great because I'm tired of integrating Facebook Connect with every iOS app I write. So if it could just save me some time, that's fantastic.
Now, I think it's great because it's one of those things where, although I'm not a fan of Facebook, people use it, and if it helps spread the word about content and things like that, then it can be a good thing.
Absolutely, and Facebook is also a big bullet point for clients. People want Facebook in their app. Maybe not consumers.
So like if clients come to you and say, we want you to create this app and we want it to have Facebook integration.
Absolutely. And more people aren't using their own user account database. They're using Facebook.
It's weird, though, that we're living in a time in technology's life cycle where things like the integration of a social networking site actually make it as a feature bullet.
It is a little strange, and it almost feels like not a full feature, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels trivial.
It's more like, hey, look at the business people put together some sort of relationship about how we're going to share your information, and now we're making a big deal about it.
That's exactly right.
I don't like that.
Well, I could understand that.
I mean, I like that Facebook's going to be available to help spread the word and things like that, but I don't know. It's this kind of stuff that is sort of it's a slippery slope, I guess. That's what I'll leave it at that.
Definitely. I mean, if you think about it, if your login system is Facebook, you're depending on Facebook.
Right. I don't think they'll do that.
Not Apple, but lots of third-party apps do.
Now, as an app developer, are you pleased that they have integrated you can like stuff from the App Store now on Facebook? So that might be sort of a way for less known developers to bust out of the Apple top lists scheme that everybody's a victim to, and get a little grassroots discovery for their app.
Yes, that's possible, but the cynic in me says there's going to be a lot of like spam.
Oh yeah.
So it may just be another system that gets gamed by the more
absolutely
larger developers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, now that it's out of iTunes, Apple will have less control over the gaming too. You know, if there's something that goes on Facebook that, you know, once somebody publishes something to their stream on Facebook, it's up. You know, the bots and other people can start, you know, resharing it from there, and it's completely out of Apple's control.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that develops. I mean, recently Apple cracked down very hard on the you know robot downloading schemes, things like that, that were artificially pumping up in-app purchase apps to the top of the chart.
Right.
They've readjusted their algorithm, and a bunch of apps just fell off the charts. So I don't know how they're going to do that with Facebook, though, because I don't know what kind of transparency there's going to be between the two companies.
Yeah. I remember, so supposedly initially the rumor was that the Ping relationship that when Apple launched iTunes Ping, that there was a relationship initially going to be in place with Facebook, but supposedly Facebook wanted like purchase information and things like that along with that connection. Apple declined, saying we don't want to share any user information with you. And then the Ping relationship was stopped. Now, here we are 2 years later, and now they're integrating Facebook in at iOS, at iTunes, and in Mac OS X Mountain Lion. So all three of their most important user-facing platforms. Do you suppose there was some sort of change in the terms of privacy sharing, or do you think without Steve Jobs there now, Tim Cook's he's just a smart business guy, and he's like, well, you know what? Times have changed. Steve's a little old school. We're going to make some compromises.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, but one thing you can say about Steve Jobs' Apple, because Tim Cook hasn't been there long enough to really judge, you knew where you stood. You know, you were the consumer. He wanted your money for his hardware.
Right.
You are not the product, and they kept your data secret.
Right.
As opposed to some free things where you're the product.
Right. It is generally, as a consumer, if you know when the primary profit is derived from some sort of sale, then you know that's what they're most interested in. They're more interested in the hardware sales in Apple's case.
Absolutely. Now, I don't know what kind of deal could have been made. I really hope they're not giving up data, only because I'm very strongly against that type of thing.
Yeah.
Because whenever your data is with somebody else, it's risky. And I know this is strange coming from the guy who recommends a cloud IDE, but there's one thing I've always liked about Apple. You knew where you stood. Like, they were going to charge you a lot for hardware, but everything was private. You know, I really hope they're not sharing like purchaser information, your profile, your age, things like that.
Right, because then in a sense they're also betraying your customers' privacy. At the same time, you know, it's sort of a multi-factor because they're essentially removing that choice from you as an app publisher.
Well, they already removed the relationship with your customer.
Yeah.
So now it's worse that they're giving that relationship to Facebook.
Right.
If that's what they're doing.
Without any say on your part.
Yeah.
But now let's point out, you've got to believe that Google Play will be integrated with Google Plus at some point. I mean,
I thought it already was.
I don't think there's like a way to like share an app from Google Play onto Google Plus. But you know, like right now there's Google Music integration where you can share a track and people can actually listen to it right there in Google Plus. I would not be surprised to see some sort of app integration where like the little app icon shows up and a buy in Google Play little button shows up and you can buy it right there and it's downloaded to your Android phone without ever leaving your Google Plus stream.
Sure. I mean, and that's something, you know, I hate to say it, but yeah, I kind of know that's what Google does. They collect data. So I treat them a little differently. I'm a big fan of Android. So
it's a double standard.
It's not a double standard. I expect privacy from Apple. I assume Google's giving out all my information.
All right. So one is like just someone you've lived to learn to accept. So does that mean you could learn to accept that about Apple?
No, because of the premium prices they charge. I only accept it with Google because they're giving me everything for free.
That's the thing right there, isn't it?
Yeah. So if Apple is going to continue pricing their products where they've been pricing them, I'm not willing to give money and information. And I would recommend that. You know, I know this is kind of a little bit of a movement that people say is overreacting, but if you're giving out all your data to avoid paying $5 a month, you need to reconsider what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're giving your data and paying the $5 a month,
like I do with Google Apps for Business.
Yeah, and I have it too.
Yeah.
So pot kettle black.
Yeah.
But in a way, I feel like Google's more honest about it. Like if you actually read their privacy policy, they tell you.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. That is true. They are right up about it. I don't think people fully appreciate the level of correlation that Google now does. I think that's lost on people. And I don't think people really, I don't know, maybe people just don't care. I don't know.
Yeah, and as a developer, it's even worse because my clients sometimes want user data, and you have to explain to them, well, Apple has it, you don't. Google has it, you don't.
I mean, I realized I'm a little slow on the uptake, but it was probably last year or maybe 2 years ago that I realized there was even such a thing as analytics for apps.
Yeah.
It just blew my mind. So they actually know where I'm touching in the app or how long I run it or all those kinds of things.
Yeah, and that's common in a lot of apps now. They have there's other products, but the most common one is Google Analytics.
Right.
So
yeah. Interesting. Do you want to talk about this Do Not Disturb feature?
Yeah. So this Do Not Disturb feature is basically you turn it on, you're not going to get annoying push notifications.
And they I believe, I'm not positive, but I believe they're making it available across Mountain Lion and iOS. Not really much probably for me to say from like a developer standpoint. I think it's a good feature. I'd like to see every operating system have a Do Not Disturb.
Well, it's important from a developer point of view because I'm noticing a trend in especially freemium games I download. If you haven't played in say 48 hours, you get not a text message, but a push notification saying the zombies are attacking, save the village, something like that. And I hate that use of push notifications. B, I do think it should be up to the consumer to say, I don't want them between X hours. Now, Do Not Disturb doesn't do that. You turn it on and it just suppresses them until you turn it off. But it's a great feature. And also, as a developer, if you have a client that wants to aggressively use them, you can kind of feel better knowing this feature exists.
You're saying it alleviates developer guilt a little bit?
It does. I mean, it really, I mean, that's the best way to say it. It alleviates a little bit of guilt. Well, because in some cases, push notifications are very helpful.
Yeah.
So you don't want the user turning them off globally, which up until this was the only option. I think this is a happy medium.
I hadn't even thought about it from that perspective. That is interesting. I totally follow that. Yeah. I like it as an end user.
All right, now this next point, I get to be a little negative.
Okay.
So General Motors, BMW, and Mercedes get an API to Siri.
Right.
I don't.
Yeah. I was expecting out of all of the stuff for iOS 6, Siri API was definitely high up there. And I don't know if you know for sure or not, Michael, but isn't the original Siri capable of this?
Yes. So Siri was originally an app in a company that Apple had purchased. I do not remember their name off the top of my head.
Was it just Siri?
No. I don't think it was Siri.
No. Well, weren't they? And they started from like some sort of like a CIA seed fund company. They were started from like a venture funding thing that's funded by the intelligence agencies. I can't remember which one exactly.
Yeah. And actually, Apple, when they bought it, stripped out a lot of functionality. So there's things the original Siri could do that the current iteration cannot do.
Right.
And this is kind of a worrying idea about these closed platforms. A certain level of publishers and developers get certain access. Mm-hmm. The masses get nothing.
Well,
it really.
I mean, let me play devil's advocate and I don't necessarily agree with this, but couldn't it be possible that Apple works it out with these couple of big dogs, and then once they get a good system that works out for the big dogs, they'll open it up to the masses?
All right, but being first is everything.
Oh, great point. Yeah, because then you own it, don't you?
You own it. If you're first, you have the market share, you have the users. The users likely bought your app and are unlikely to buy another.
Right. So whatever category they want to own, they will just now for here out own.
They're going to own it.
Yeah, that does blow.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, granted, I'm not making automobiles, so maybe I shouldn't care that much. Mm-hmm. But this is a worrying trend, and this is not just an Apple thing. Any of them with app stores could do it.
Well, look at what I just talked about this yesterday on the Linux Action Show. GNOME, the desktop, is going to have its own app store now, competing with Canonical's Ubuntu Software Center, and and the OpenSUSE project had announced their intentions to start an app store.
Isn't OpenSUSE in some kind of trouble though?
Yeah.
But so that's interesting. GNOME is going the wrong. So that's kind of like the Amazon App Store for Android then.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, right? But it's sort of an example, though, of when the platform vendor just decides to integrate something that the third parties have already been doing for a while, and now they're kind of now we just have to see what happens. Now they're kind of against each other. They're sort of up against each other. Now they're competing.
Yeah, and I'm sure the GNOME App Store isn't going to come pre-installed.
It's probably built into GNOME.
I don't know. This is kind of one of the downsides. It's hard to be an alternative.
Yeah.
I wish GNOME well. I'm a big GNOME fan.
Well, I mean, this is a little premature to jump, but it just segues so great into also the map announcements, because Apple kind of did something that they don't normally do, and this is something I'd like to see Google do, where they're actually making maps available for third-party integrations for like turn-by-turn navigation and things like that. So they're actually going to even feature apps that work with the map system in the Maps app. That's like a totally different Apple approach, don't you think?
So yes and no. The opening it up is different. Featuring apps that do things they want you to do is not new. For instance, when iCloud came out, any app that had iCloud that was decent looking tended to get featured.
Yeah.
And then that's what they do to feature the new APIs, and that's not a bad idea. What's more interesting about this for me is that they've replaced a fully functioning map system that was free to them.
Mm-hmm. Well, was it? I think they paid a license. I think they paid for it.
Did they pay a license? I thought they just paid in data.
I think the only reason I say that is because I know Google made a significant chunk of change from Apple for the Maps relationship. I don't know into what regard that is, but I don't know.
Even if it wasn't free, you have to imagine the companies they bought and the R&D for this.
Oh, significantly cheaper to go the Google route. Significantly.
I saw the keynote. I saw what they were showing. It looks beautiful. Mm-hmm. But I'm concerned for HTML5 developers. Does this now cause mapping fragmentation? That is an odd phrase.
Yeah. What do you mean by that? You mean like Google Maps versus Bing Maps versus Apple Maps? Haven't we always had that? We've always had different maps.
Right, but on Android and iOS, it was still Google Maps.
Yeah.
It was the same maps. Now will there be hooks into the Apple mapping system for, say, PhoneGap or any other kind of HTML5 framework?
I bet they make it available like that. I think they have to, because the Google Maps version was.
Well, so also with PhoneGap, you could use the JavaScript Google Maps. So I think it will eventually be available. I think it's going to lag behind about 6 months.
Yeah.
And I think some of the better functionality might not be there. And even if it is, there's no guarantee that your PhoneGap code, your JavaScript code, is going to be as portable as it was, let's say, a month ago.
But as an end user, the thing that I note about Apple is, remember when they got busted for that AP caching file that wasn't properly encrypted on the iPhone?
You mean the location database?
Yeah. And they came right out and said, like, oh, yeah, well, we're using that because we're collecting statistical data about traffic, and we're going to be featuring that in a Maps service. And so we know that for years now, they've been collecting data to support the back-end infrastructure of this Maps application. This could be the companies they've bought, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but were really well-respected companies. They could have a significant contribution here, and honestly, I'd like to see Google Maps get a little competition.
Oh, so would I. And if I misspoke, I don't mean that this is going to be less good for the users. I mean, for the developer writing an HTML5 app, the API might not be the same.
Well, see, Google, I think, will always, in my opinion, have an inherent advantage with anything that's more web-based, because as far as I know, Apple Maps aren't even available online. Whereas with Google, like,
Sure.
in the app, I can generate a link that the user could then email to a desktop that the desktop person could then click on, and it'll open the same exact map up in their web browser with the same exact turn-by-turn instructions that are identical. And that is such a basic piece of functionality that I don't believe is present in Apple's maps, that I don't really think Google has a huge challenge here, but I think it's just enough to kick their butt in gear.
It's significant just because of the loss of data.
Yeah.
Remember, that's their bread and butter.
Right. Also, the other approach is you see that Google has from the ground up, Google has their own fleet of Street View cars. Google hired their own planes.
They have an Air Force.
Yeah, and Google does their own turn-by-turn, whereas Apple is outsourcing the turn-by-turn component to TomTom, and they're licensing TomTom's engine to do that.
True.
And I think that's also a very competitive advantage that Apple will have there, because they're going to get a very mature turn-by-turn product out of the box, which will then encourage Google's turn-by-turn product, which is good, but could use a little improvement. I've used it quite a bit, at least in this area, could use a little improvement, and maybe this will help that too.
Yeah, ultimately, competition is going to make both maps better. I mean, my Android phone has taken me on some scary routes, a few circles,
Yeah.
4 left turns in a row, things like that.
Mine took me through the parking lot a couple days ago of a business. I mean, I got there, but I was like, wow, the parking lot? How did that even happen?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the next point?
Yeah, you mentioned iCloud a little bit in there. You want to talk about that?
So iCloud integrates with Core Data. So Core Data is the database abstraction layer for iOS and Mac.
Okay.
The problem is currently it doesn't always work. And when it doesn't work, there's no message that said iCloud failed.
Oh,
it
man.
looks like your app failed. So what you end up with is very grumpy users and very grumpy clients. So one thing they were pushing in the keynote is better iCloud. I'm hoping that means actually more stable. Because you'll get in a situation where you'll be writing your data and it'll just stop.
Wow.
Yeah, it feels very
beta.
A little beta. I mean, that's just with the Core Data integration.
Okay.
Writing text files, it's fine. And remember, Apple was never a cloud service company, so this is a little bit of a new ground for them.
Well,
other than iTunes.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, iTunes is pretty rock solid in terms of stability. I mean, in terms of application, that's a whole other thing. But, in terms of service availability and distribution of, which, by the way, also they're distributing huge audio files and huge video files, like 2 of the hardest things to distribute online, and they do it at insanely good speeds and reliability. So there's the positive. The negative is they are not translating some of the other lessons learned properly, I don't think. And what I mean by that is this really isn't new for Apple anymore. They've been doing this since they introduced the iMac and didn't have a floppy drive. They introduced at that point iDisk.
Yes.
And they have been doing and that is the 90s or something, or 2002 or whatever it was. They just haven't learned. It's just not where their head's at.
Now but there's a significant difference here between iTunes and the iCloud developer portal. In that, if this data is still good, I was reading that iTunes is largely hosted on Amazon and some other services. They are now building their own data centers that they have to manage for iCloud and moving away from these other kind of solutions.
Right.
So the question is, how good are they at managing big data without help?
Yeah.
Because actually it came out when they first launched iCloud, they were hosting a lot of it on Azure.
Right. Well, the beta version of it, yeah.
The beta of it, and yeah. So I hope it goes well because it would make my life so much easier. And I think these kind of solutions are probably the future. Local storage is it's going away. As people buy Ultrabooks, as people use these mobile devices, you need to be able to save it somewhere.
You know what I was impressed by too, because I think there's probably half our audience is going to hear what you just said and say, "No way, dude! Local storage is always going to be required." However, I've been talking to people like our very own Chase on Unfilter, and but also other folks who say that LTE connections at E3, and cell data is known to die at conventions. It's where cell phones go to die because the signal jam and all of that kind of stuff. He was saying, and he was live streaming over LTE, and other people are saying their LTE connections were still rocking them 7-8 megabits, even with a huge crowd there. And
really?
Now, sure, you got to figure LTE isn't the most popularly, used cell band, but I think that's extremely encouraging to see that we're rolling out new wireless technologies that can handle more and more users and more data. And then we start looking at things like actually having all my stuff in the cloud, or 95% of my stuff in the cloud and just my essentials local. That starts to seem pretty practical.
Yeah, I mean, as bandwidth scales, you're going to get more cloud solutions.
I mean, he was getting 7 and 8 megabits up and down. I mean, that's better than some people's internet connection at home.
That's very impressive. I have an LTE Galaxy Nexus, and I don't get anything near that. But
Well, maybe they brought an extra cell capacity. I don't know.
yeah, maybe I have a grumpy phone call to make. But
What kind
I
of
mean,
speeds
also
do you see?
1 megabyte, maybe 2, which is still amazing for
Yeah,
a cell phone.
yeah. Okay.
So one other point on this though is I think people are going to be moving to smaller SSDs. For instance, I just moved to an SSD. I got the Dell XPS 13, which any of you Linux fans will know is the Project Sputnik from Dell and Ubuntu.
Mm-hmm. Which you're giving thumbs up.
Oh, I love it. And the
Kinda
SSD is lightning fast.
You're making me want one. And it's got a Core i5 in it too.
It does. Yep. Yes, it does.
In a little book like that. That's how many pounds is that thing?
I think it's like 1 pound, 2 pounds.
Shut up.
It's very light.
How's the keyboard?
If you like MacBook keyboards, you're gonna like it.
So it's kind of chiclet style?
It's
I don't care so much about that, but like, how is the response? Like, is it satisfying to type on?
Again, if you use any of the Apple keyboards, it's exactly the same.
Okay, those are kind of middle of the road. They're not awful, but they're not great. They're good enough.
I mean, the thing I like is it's less of a shameless MacBook Air clone. Also, the blazing fast boot speeds. I don't think I can go back to.
It was 120 gig SSD in there.
120 gig. It came configured with Windows 7, so I was down to like 90. I don't know what they filled 30 gigs with, but.
I totally, completely agree. My anecdotal evidence also suggests the same thing. I am right now recording on a Hackintosh that I recently rebuilt.
You're a horrible person.
And the operating system runs on a 120 gigabyte SSD, and then I have another 120 gigabyte SSD in there that has Ubuntu on it. And the reason I decided to go, it was cheaper to go with 2 smaller dedicated SSDs than to go with a big one. And I also edit on this machine, so I have 6 regular spinning 1 terabyte drives in there, but these are 750s. Anyways, so I have larger media too, but in terms of like what I just need to run the OS and the apps, it doesn't really require that much storage, and I can get by.
And the compile speeds are incredible.
Everything is so much faster. SSD is one of those things where you hear people talk about it, but until you do have one, you don't realize, like, you hear those things like your CPU is starved for information.
Right.
It is so true. I mean, these newer processors and stuff are just so fast, and when you have SSDs, whew.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a developer in the market for any kind of computer, whether it's a Mac, Windows, or an Ubuntu PC, get an SSD. It's just for compiling. If you do anything that's like C, C++, Objective-C, that stupid linking phase will be so much faster.
Lots of, it's lots of little files, right? Is that what it is? Yeah.
And in Xcode, it does something weird with graphical assets. So, and the sad part is this machine only has 4 gigs of RAM. All my other machines have 8, and it blows them away.
Isn't that interesting? Well, even if you're swapping to an SSD.
It's incredible. I haven't been this happy with a computer in a long time.
I agree, and also if you can fit it on there, games just fly. All the assets they have to load and everything like that are just lightning fast.
I've been afraid to fill it up too much, but
yeah, I know you do have to watch it. That is the problem. Is there is a little bit of storage anxiety, and that's the only reason why I'd love to see them larger, just so I don't ever have to think about it. Why don't we, before we jump out of here, before we get done talking about the stuff that came from WWDC, one other item that I think is probably worth bringing up, and I saw you noted it too, is Mountain Lion, and iOS has had this for a while, but now Mountain Lion will have Game Center.
Yeah, I mean, Game Center, it's an Xbox Live competitor.
Yeah.
I like these kind of things. I like to win little achievements and little badges. More importantly, if you're a game developer, you can integrate with it, and it helps, user engagement, things like that. It also has some great peer-to-peer, so you don't have to run your own servers, multiplayer functionality for your games. And that's all
like the famous turn-based games like not Draw with Friends, but
Hero Cat, Draw Something.
Yeah, Draw Something, and there's also Words with Friends. Those kinds of turn-based games, which are great on tablets. Are the turns are now managed by Game Center too, right?
Yeah, from a development point of view, developing any kind of board game or, like Chris is saying, turn-based game, Game Center is an API you need to know. It's going to lower your costs because you don't need to run servers, and it's going to lower the development time overall.
This is a problem Google's going to probably try to solve also, I would expect, with Google+.
I would hope, because although they don't have a right API yet, so they should probably do that first.
And Microsoft's already solved it with the Xbox Live.
Yes, they did.
But what astonishes me is Apple has beaten them to the punch in terms of iOS integration with desktops. There's actually going to be some games, they demoed one up on stage where there was a fighter game that somebody could play on their iPad versus somebody on their Mac. So you had cross iOS desktop competitions, matches being created and then tracked via Game Center on both platforms. To me, that's something that Xbox Live should have rolled out of the gate with on Windows Phone.
Yeah, I actually didn't know they didn't have it. I thought it was cross on Xbox Live. It's not.
Well, I don't know. I've never had a Windows Phone, but what I do know is it's not like matching. It's not like you can actually be shooting at somebody that's on a Windows Phone that's all playing on the desktop. You can't do that. What you can do is there's like some games have like sub components that are related to the Xbox version of the game that you can only do on the phone, and that give you like unlock little things in the Xbox, that kind of integration. But as far as I know, there's not like one-on-one type integration. And I thought that was actually pretty interesting because they're pretty different platforms that are now going to be able to play the same games.
Yeah, and it's a good sign for game developers because Apple has never really taken games seriously. This is a sign that they are taking them seriously.
Yeah, that's true, right?
And I mean, this kind of integration, the amount of processing for multiplayer you can leverage onto them rather than to your infrastructure, it's something to look into.
Yeah. So there you go. Now, in a couple of weeks, Google I/O is coming up, and we'll maybe tease this a little more at the end. But it sounds like initially Michael's planning to break that into 2 episodes because we're expecting a lot in both the HTML5 front and on the Android front.
Yeah, Google, it was much more exciting. I hate to say it, but
well, Google is because while the Apple stuff is exciting to people who live exclusively in the Apple universe, the Google stuff applies to the Google universe and to the rest of the web in general when they talk about the HTML5 stuff. So to me, it's wider reaching.
Yes, and remember, Google now has their own Dart programming language. That is, this is I think I'm teasing a little bit here, but this goes into kind of some of the issues that have been discussed around JavaScript recently. And I'm hoping that they have some kind of announcement or some kind of demos in that space, the HTML5 JavaScript space, using Dart.
The other thing that's nice about Google is you don't have to deal with this NDA stuff. Because there's probably stuff that you've learned about since WWDC's keynote that would be interesting to share on the show that you can't.
Plead the fifth.
Well, why don't we take a break right there just to remind folks that, well, heck, if you'd like to support the continued development of fine programs like Coder Radio, you can use our affiliate links over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Just scroll down to the very bottom of Jupiter Broadcasting, and you'll find links down there for Amazon US, UK, Newegg, ThinkGeek, Best Buy, Mint.com, Audible, and Gamefly. And when you use those before you shop, a portion of your purchase does go to support Jupiter Broadcasting and these shows. And we really appreciate it when you do that. Now, I never asked you before, are you an Audible
I'm
listener?
A huge Audible fan.
Oh, good. Because so am I. I am such a big Audible fan, and I just got a new audiobook that I already am in love with. I think I'll start telling people about because I'm probably going to talk about it a little bit since I'm listening to it. So everybody knows Will Wheaton. And Will Wheaton just recently read Ready Player One. And Ready Player One was good. But he's now here with another new book he's reading from John Salassi. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. It's called Red Shirts. If you're a Star Trek fan, you can probably guess what that's referring to.
From the top of the large boulder he sat on, Ensign Tom Davis looked across the expanse of the cave toward Captain Lucius Abernathy, Science Officer King, and Chief Engineer Paul West, perched on a second, larger boulder, and thought, well, this sucks. Borgovian landworms, Captain Abernathy said, and smacked his boulder with an open palm. I should have known. You should have known? How the hell could you not have known? Thought Ensign Davis, and looked at the vast dirt floor of the cave.
So this is such a great play. You know, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Galaxy Quest. Remember the Tim Allen movie where it was sort of like a play on all things Star Trek in a way?
Right.
This book is a lot like that, very tongue-in-cheek. It's 7 hours, 41 minutes. It's got tons of great reviews on Audible. One review is called Death by Away Team. So much fun. Anyways, check it out. Here's the deal. If you're a new Audible subscriber, I'll put a link in the show notes. If you use that link and you sign up for Audible, you get the book for free. And then if you even decide to cancel Audible, you get to keep the book. So it's a pretty good deal. You get it for 1 credit. I actually get 2 credits a month. So I got this book and the Walter Cronkite book, which just came out.
Nice.
So there you go. If you want to support Coder Radio, that's a great way to do it. Now, are you able to listen to audiobooks while you code?
I do. I actually just finished yesterday during a very aggressive coding tear, Digital Vertigo by Andrew Keen.
Oh, yeah? Digital Vertigo, huh?
Yes, I'm a bad person for doing this, he says.
Why?
If you're interested in these kind of things, he's basically arguing that the overuse of social media is making us actually more lonely rather than more connected to each other.
Oh, interesting.
That, and he has an awesome British accent, so...
I've been an Audible subscriber now for a couple of years. I've got quite a library of stuff.
Yeah.
And I never even really realized how much I liked books, but the great thing about Audible is you can use it in the car, you can use it while you're working, you can use it while you're trying to sleep. And I actually have different books. Like I have Star Trek books that are just kind of silly Star Trek books, but they have like sound effects and all that kind of stuff.
Nice.
And I have a little pillow speaker that goes underneath my pillow, and I just set the Audible app, which is awesome, to have like a 30-minute timer, and I just kind of doze off to a Star Trek story, and it stops, and I don't go too far in the book. I really like it. So, all right. Now, this is our WWDC focused episode. We we took a little bit of a risk in our second episode because we didn't want people to think we're going to be a very Apple focused show all the time. But we're going to talk about what's in the developers, what's going on in the world of software development. This is what's going on right now,
and it is now a big and growing developer community.
Yeah, it's true.
Although
that's true.
I think we should move to our next segment because that might shrink.
Yeah, you're talking about the Pro market, right? The MacBook Pro market and things like that?
Yeah, so the Mac Pro.
Yeah, the Mac Pro Tower. Sad.
Yeah.
So now these are historically extremely overpriced. I'm sorry, but
they are.
I actually priced that the equivalent Hackintosh I have here, a 6-core machine with 6 gigs of RAM, which I've upgraded to 8, but with theirs you start at 6, and fully decked out storage. It cost me $2,300 off of Newegg, and it would be $4,000 to buy the equivalent Mac Pro.
Yeah, they're very expensive. And what's interesting is, given this lackluster update, all they did was basically tweak the motherboard and processor infrastructure.
Yeah, well, they took off the lowest 4-core line, and they dropped it only to the 6-core, and they gave the 6-core line a $700 price drop, and everything else got a $200 price drop. And the reason why I know this is because I have all these Hackintoshes, and honestly, it makes me a nervous wreck to have so much of my infrastructure for Jupiter Broadcasting's recording infrastructure to run on Hackintoshes. So I thought, if they came out with a good upgrade, I would consider it, because I have to run these tools on this platform. These tools are written for this platform. I can't run them on any other operating system, and I have to have PCI Express expansion cards because I have a couple of HDMI capture cards.
So what's interesting, a lot of my friends in the developer community who may not be Apple developers but use Macs as their build machines are going the Hackintosh route.
Unfortunately, I can't recommend it necessarily, but I can't avoid it. I now run 3 Hackintoshes that are critical to production because I need expansion, I need vast amounts of memory, and I need vast amounts of storage. We're talking 100 gigs or I'm sorry, 120 gigs for one episode of Linux Action Show. And you figure I do 6 shows a week, so I have to, and it has to be fast. It has to be able to write at 120 megabytes a second. You can't do that. You can't do that with an iMac.
No, not affordably at least. And so this kind of leads into the other issue. Now the other Macs, for the most part, the RAM is going to be soldered into the motherboard, which means that if you need to upgrade, you need to buy a new machine.
I mean, yeah, that is true, but they're starting at 8 gigs.
They are, but let's say you're not on a 1 year, 2 year upgrade cycle.
Right. I mean,
And yeah,
you're kind of stuck.
you're stuck because if you want to use one machine as your dev and your build machine, you pretty much have to buy right off the bat a 16 gig machine. If you want to future proof. Depending on what kind. I mean, if you're doing web development, yeah, it doesn't really matter that much. So it does depend on what you're doing. But if you're doing any kind of large scale desktop development, you're gonna need to buy a really expensive rig.
You don't have a problem with the storage being soldered in, the disk storage?
No, I have a problem with that too because I actually recently had my Mac Pro's hard drive die and had to have it replaced. It's all. I mean, I like interchangeable parts. I like being able to, replace a hard drive if something bad happens.
Oh, sure.
So this is making me a little leery, and I know what Brian Lunduke does is he has a Linux dev machine, and correct me if I'm wrong, and an Apple build machine.
Yeah, probably.
I may move to that. Only because
it's just. So, what would you build on? Like any? It doesn't really matter at that point. You could use any machine as your compiling machine, and it just doesn't really matter.
Well, no. So for iOS and Mac, I need a Mac to compile and to build. For web, I actually prefer Ubuntu.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah.
So, and something I'll tease later, Ubuntu has been on my mind quite a lot.
See, this is what is interesting. Is I think these steps that Apple are taking that are uncomfortable for people exactly like you and I think a lot of people in our audience. And Microsoft, traditionally people would just bail over to Windows 7, the latest and greatest. You know what? All right, Apple, I'm leaving. I'm going to go get myself a brand new Dell. Especially now that the laptop makers all have sort of MacBook Pro knockoffs and MacBook Air knockoffs. You can go get yourself one that almost looks like it was made by Apple. It's just Windows 8's a train wreck, and I don't think that's going to be a salvation for people either. So Ubuntu and other distributions that are well positioned to take advantage of this could see a definite uptick. Here's the thing, though: I think that's all. I think it's all an overreaction, though. Because what are we talking about here? I mean, let's be honest. If you got this MacBook Retina with 8 gigs of RAM and 512 gigabyte SSD, you'd probably be fine for 3 or 4 years.
Oh, you'd be fine for at least 3 years.
And the reality is, and I think something that people are discounting is Thunderbolt isn't your grandpa's I/O connector. Thunderbolt is very fast. It's connected directly to the PCI Express bus, and we've already seen things like external GPU enclosures where you can actually get an entire NVIDIA card that replaces the built-in video card in a Thunderbolt enclosure. Now, maybe there needs to be some sort of motherboard support for that kind of switching. But Thunderbolt's going to allow a type of expansion that we've never really seen before. Like in the past, external storage always had to kind of be second-class option. The FireWire's fast, but it's not fast enough, that kind of thing. But now with Thunderbolt, well, you can do 10 gigabits. That's faster than any disk I/O system is really capable of delivering you in most cases.
Yeah, I mean, I have 2 Thunderbolt machines, and I haven't seen the support from third parties.
True. But now that Apple's building in 2 Thunderbolt ports into this thing, I think you will. And there are companies that have announced plans for products. But I agree, you're right. It's been very lukewarm reception.
I mean, I'm still using everything on USB.
I don't like USB.
What about USB 3? Still don't like it?
Well, it's fine. It's just the thing I like about both FireWire and Thunderbolt is they have a dedicated controller, and that means that the processor isn't bothered with it. And the reason why that's important for me is when you're doing large video streams, the CPU is completely busy taking care of other things. Processing the inbound data needs to be handled by dedicated hardware. It's the only way to get the kind of throughput you need.
Sure.
So to me, it's just USB isn't really capable of delivering. Even 3, because the problem with USB 3 is the increased throughput means increased CPU load.
So it's for high def video, you're thinking.
Yeah. Well, some of the stuff I'm talking is 120 megabytes a second, and it just takes a lot of to do that and not drop a single frame takes a lot of stuff working in the chain for me. But and this is why I need the towers, and this is why it's sad that they're dropping support for those towers.
So let me ask you, are you doing updates on your Hackintoshes, or are you just ignoring them?
I might on this latest one I just built, because I use something called Cakewalk,
Okay.
which Cakewalk, if you have the right gigabyte motherboard and you have the right video card, it's like click and click and you're done. It takes you first you run it on a legit Mac or another Hackintosh, and you give it the Lion media, and you tell it for what motherboard, and it sucks in the Lion media and pre-patches it and flashes it to a USB drive for you. And then you boot from that USB drive, and you just install Lion like you normally would on a Mac, and then you reboot, and you install the absolute latest update. You have to go get the combo update from the web. You don't use system software update.
Right.
You go get the latest combo update, which in this case was 10.7.4. You install that, and then you just run the Cakewalk patcher, and you reboot, and you're done. You've got a completely up-to-date Hackintosh that is ready to go.
Wow, so it sounds like there is quite a lot of support for this type of thing now.
Oh yeah, but this is like there's 30 motherboards, or maybe not that many. There's like 15 motherboards you can pick from, and they're not the cheapest motherboards out there. And there's 30 video cards maybe you can pick from, 20 video cards you can pick from. Now,
Yeah, because I built a Hackintosh a few years ago, and it was an awful experience.
well, here's the thing. Here's the compelling thing about it is I have an ATI 6890 in this Hackintosh. Apple doesn't offer a desktop with a graphics card. The best thing Apple offers is the 5870 for the desktop.
Sure.
And I don't know what's in the iMac, but it's a mobile chip, whatever it is. It's a mobile chip.
Yeah.
And this is a full-on ATI Radeon 6890, and it rocks. I mean, I'm playing SOTOR full screen on a 30-inch cinema. And to have that, now I'm doing that. I'm
sorry. You're playing what?
SOTOR, Star Wars: The Old Republic. I
thought they went out of business.
No. I triple boot this thing. Between Ubuntu, Windows 7, and Mac OS 10. And it's another thing. It's just extremely easy to do. I just have 3 hard drives. I have 3 operating systems, and then the BIOS just lets me select which drive I want to boot from, and I just boot that operating system. And it's extremely flexible, and it's more powerful than what I could buy from Apple.
All right, yeah, we should definitely put this in the show notes.
Okay, I'll put
because I think I might want to do this now.
I'll put that in there because it's disappointing, and honestly, I also would rather just be able to replace all of this stuff with an Ubuntu workstation, but the software's not there.
All right, should we move on?
Sure. What's the next one?
All right, so the next one's pretty quick. They didn't announce a longer iPhone, which either means that they're not doing it or they're going to announce it and not tell developers.
I think it's probably the latter one. There.
Probably. So if I'm crying in September or October, you know why.
Yeah.
That's pretty quick.
Okay.
After that, they released a Retina Mac.
Yeah, the Retina MacBook Pro. I was just looking at that on the stream. What do you think?
I'm not interested in it just yet, but unfortunately, I'm going to have to get a Retina machine for testing. My concern is, what is it going to do for websites? Because the way Retina used to work on the iPhone is if you show a non-Retina asset, it looks kind of blurry. So I'm wondering, is the majority of the internet going to look blurry until web devs?
I've heard some people say that.
Yeah, to me, that's an upgrade that is in effect a downgrade.
Yeah, and the problem with it is that it would mean upgrading the graphics on websites to accommodate those Retina displays, but larger images for everyone that visits. Which
means slower data transfer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, the sad thing is this is one of Apple's things. You know, they do something and everybody else is going to do it.
I would instead of using their BS Retina mode that runs the stupid thing in like 1440 by 900, if you can believe it, I would prefer to just figure out how to hack it to run it at the full screen resolution. Because the full resolution is you would get so much real estate. It's ridiculous. I have, like I mentioned, this cinema display is 2560 by 1600, 2560 by 1600, and I could use more. I could use more than that. And that Retina display, if you get it at its native resolution, is a wider resolution than that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I would love more screen real estate. My concern is websites and all these larger assets that are going to be required.
Yeah, you're right about that.
Because a lot of websites do some fancy design by just stitching together big JPEGs. So are they going to get even bigger?
I don't want to overhaul all the graphics on the website and make them bigger. It's just not something I am interested in doing. I think I would rather the minority that visit with the MacBooks just have a worse experience.
I think that's the reasonable thing to do for now. The question is the rest of the industry gonna go to these higher resolution displays?
Well, and also the iPad 3. If you combine MacBook Pro Retina users with iPad 3s, then it becomes a slightly larger audience that you would be upgrading like website assets for. That starts to kind of change the equation a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, my personal belief, it's a matter of time before you start seeing Dells and HPs with these type of screens.
Yeah. Yeah, now that the panels exist and things like that, they're going to be. It's not like, I'm sure Apple probably has the first batch.
They probably have it for 6 months, a year even.
Yeah. Interesting thing to watch, though. All right, should we jump on to your? By the way, I put the link at the bottom of the hardware changes. I put a link to the cakewalk thing in the show notes, so you can. Here, I'll put it in the chat room too for you folks who are watching live. You know what I forgot to mention before we jump to your tool of the week is I'm such a dope. I got all excited about the Audible app book, or the Audible books. I just got a new book. Is Jupiter Broadcasting has a Chrome extension that people can grab. If you go over to bit.ly/jbchrome, or just go to the bottom of Jupiter Broadcasting, it's there. And that Chrome extension, when you use that, for the sites that we can do it for, they will turn on the affiliate stuff for you automatically, and it automatically contributes a portion anonymously of your shopping session at some of those sites to us, and you don't even have to think about it. So you can find that over at bit.ly/jbchrome, or the link is at the bottom of jupiterbroadcasting.com. Thank you, everybody. All right, Michael, now you want to do your tool of the week for us?
All right, so the tool is, in keeping with the WWDC theme, is a Mac app called Paint Code that is for iOS and Mac developers that allows you to create images graphically, or I should say elements graphically, such as buttons, labels, things like that. And then it generates the core drawing code for you. So instead of using assets, you just take this code and use it, and it draws it for you.
Oh, look at you doing a themed pick. That's really clever.
Yeah, it's clever, right?
So this is just something that I, as a rookie, would take for granted. But yeah, you have to code all those buttons and everything, and there's not something that already does this for you?
Well, there is, but the problem is if you're not using the built-in widgets and you want to do your own assets and your own kind of shades.
Like it's some sort of custom look for your app. And this might be something, maybe somebody who wants to skin it completely, that way they have the same consistent look across multiple platforms, right?
Yeah. Yes, and you can totally do this with images, but now that in each iOS app you have to have Retina and non-Retina images, your binaries are getting bloated.
Yeah.
It's going to be the same for Mac apps soon.
Yeah.
One would presume. Depending on the size of your app, especially with the 50 megabyte download limit, it might make sense to draw them in code with a tool like this.
Well, I would think so. That would be that'd be significantly smaller, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you're not having all these PNGs, it's going to be a ton smaller.
Yeah, okay. Well, there you go. So it's called Paint Code, and there's a trial version available over at paintcodeapp.com.
It's a little pricey, so if you're not deep into Mac development or iOS development, it may not be
How much is it? How much is it?
I think it's like $50 or $100.
Oh, that's not bad, dude. This would, for the kind of time savings this thing, and does it produce good code?
Oh yeah, I bought it and I use it, and it saved me tons of. So it's paid for itself more than once for me.
Oh, $50, $100. That's, if it's a professional tool like that, that's not bad.
I think it's $100.
$100, and it's also in the Mac App Store. Wow. This is a very Mac. This is probably the most Mac heavy thing we've ever done on Jupiter Broadcasting. But
and please send your hate mail to Chris at jupiterbroadcasting.com.
Yeah, there you go. So, this app actually looks really badass.
It's pretty good, and actually, I won't say it, but you mentioned cross-platform. It may be possible to do something like that using this.
Oh, really?
Depending on the platform.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, while we get wrapping up here, why don't you tell people where they can find you and get a hold of you and stuff like that?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at @Dumanuko. You can find me on Google Plus with my name, Michael Dominic. You can find my website, mdominic.com. In fact, if you read my website, you'll probably get a quick tease of the following week's episodes.
Oh.
Speaking of teasing, did you want to tease a little bit or no?
Oh, yeah, let's totally. Like some of the upcoming episodes. Do it.
All right. So today was Apple heavy. We're going right back to multi-platform next week.
Okay.
We're going to talk about JavaScript, and we're going to talk about assembly.
Oh boy. JavaScript and assembly in the same episode, huh?
And we're going to tell you that they're not the same thing, and that you should stop making this analogy because it's foolish.
Okay.
But also, in the spirit of being, seeing both sides, I'm going to take a look at the higher level tools such as CoffeeScript and ScriptSharp, and Dart, of course, that compile to JavaScript and try and use that assembly analogy for so-called programmer convenience.
Okay.
I mean, it may be pretty clear which side of this I fall on.
Yeah.
And if you go to my website, it's super clear. But this is a really big issue, especially if you're a junior developer or you're any type of web developer. This is flame bait.
Oh yeah. Okay.
But it is an important technology today. I mean, JavaScript is huge.
Right.
If you don't know JavaScript and you're doing anything in HTML5, you're not doing it.
Right.
Like, you're lying. Even if you're using CoffeeScript, if there's a problem, you have to know JavaScript to fix it.
Totally.
So it's it should be interesting, and I would love any feedback or your thoughts before the show, especially if you disagree with me, because I'd like to have both sides.
Oh yeah, totally. That'd be great. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to that, and it's been fun to get the show off the ground, and now that we're off and running, it's pretty exciting. We're live every single Monday, and it's cool because on the West Coast it's a morning show at 9 a.m. and on the East Coast it's an afternoon show. It's like a lunchtime show, which is awesome because then if you are, say, I don't know, in London right now, you could be in London right now. It's 6 p.m. It's an evening show for you. So that's cool. That's not bad. And if of course, if you're in Australia, it's 3 a.m. That's really a morning show, so I apologize about that. All right, Michael. Well, that sounds great. I think that just about wraps up this week's episode of Coder Radio. Just a note, over in the show note links, there are now links for torrent versions. So I'll put that there, and you can download and subscribe to a torrent version in your RSS feeder too. We got a little feed over there for your reader.
Very nice.
Torrent or something like that. Yeah. And you can also catch Coder Radio available on demand Tuesday mornings. I actually get it out sort of Monday afternoons, but early Tuesday mornings if you want to grab this for your commute. And of course, we want to hear your feedback. Email us coderradio@jupiterbroadcasting.com. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for tuning to this week's episode. We'll see you right back here next week.
See you next week.